You set foot on foreign soil. Only this land isn't ruled by any country or government. In this land, we celebrate music. In this land, we celebrate games. In this land, we celebrate those who compose video game music. Welcome to the VG Embassy. Welcome and thanks for tuning in to another episode of the VG Embassy. This is a show centered around video game music and the amazing online community of fans and podcasters that enjoy it. My name's Ed, and on each episode I'll take the role of Prime VGM Minister and invite a guest VG Ambassador onto the show to share with us their own video game music culture. Or I may share a part of my culture on a solo show. And speaking of solo shows, I remember that I promised a solo show at the end of last episode, but I lied, because we have an awesome show with an awesome guest, and I'm going to just push that solo show out and out and out until it's going to be like 2021 or something. But anyways, today I have the other Cameron with me for another type of nostalgia show. This is NES Nostalgia with Cameron W. Chiles. I'm just making up your middle initial because it sounds fun.
W is a good one. W is a good one. It's B, but that's okay.
Okay, we'll go Cameron B.W. Chiles. How's that?
Yep.
All right, very good.
Let's go BMW Chiles and just finish that.
Oh, I like it. So, how are you, sir? How you been since the last time we chatted?
I've been great. Been busy with all kinds of good stuff and listening to the show and, enjoying what you've been putting out as well.
Yeah, so your VGM cover band, The Mad Gear, just released a new album. Tell me a little bit about it, please.
That's right. It's called Symphony of the Fight, and if you've been keeping up with our YouTube stuff and Facebook and all that over the last, year and a half, it's all the stuff we've recorded here at our house, or my house rather. We got it all together, got it all mixed and mastered real nice, and got some nice cover art, and the whole deal, and we feel real happy with it. So yeah, pretty stoked on it.
Yeah, it's been on rotation in my car for the past couple of weeks or so.
Awesome.
Really good stuff, and I do recommend you check it out. I'll put links to it in the show notes, as well as some other places you can find Mr. Cam on the web. Yeah,
and not to put you on the spot too much, but do you have a highlighted track? Do you have one that you like more than the others?
I can't pick a favorite one. Get back to me. I'll think about it, and I'll give you an answer at the end of the show. How's that?
Okay.
So what are we talking about today? We came up with a very cool topic, and I feel like this is going to be one of those shows that's going to take everybody back to their teeny tiny childhoods.
Yeah, it's nostalgia, and we were trying to come up with some stuff together, and we came up with a few ideas, but the one that stuck was, just talking about, for me, stuff that I was hearing, and when I was 3, 4, 5 years old. And, I would say, quote unquote, playing the games, obviously some of it being that young, you don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But just for me, it was kind of thinking about those tunes and those games that are like real fuzzy for me. And I know you're a couple years older and it's a different experience for you, but it's all very precious to me, and like it definitely informed my taste in game music and maybe music in general, for the rest of my life. So yeah, just looking back on some of that stuff, especially the things that are a little more unique to my own home collection and some of the stuff I rented frequently or whatever. Because obviously we've, if we had an NES, most of us have certain games in common. Like most of us are going to know Contra and Double Dragon and Mario and Zelda and all that stuff. And it almost goes without saying that they've got great soundtracks, but I wanted to kind of bring up some stuff that, if they have been featured on my normal digest of video game music podcasts. I've missed it, or they didn't give a lot of attention to it or whatever. So I just kind of wanted to highlight some stuff that's a little less talked about.
Yeah, I kind of went the same way. I figured, of course I've got nostalgia for Super Mario Brothers 2 and Super Mario Brothers 3, but everybody knows those songs. Everybody's got their own kind of story behind those games. So I myself, too, wanted to pick out some of the games that maybe other people didn't have in their collections and that they may want to check out, or, a tune that they might not be familiar with. It just makes for, a more interesting show, some more interesting conversation.
Yep.
So tell me about your earliest experience with the NES. Now, did you have like an older sibling that got it, or was it okay? So I don't even know. Like, I didn't even know you had siblings. So how did that all come about?
Yes. So I've got one older brother. He's 4.5 years older than me, and I don't know this for sure, but I think he got it for his birthday, his 5th birthday in 1985, which was the year I was born.
Okay.
So if it wasn't 85, it was 86 or 87. So. Point being, like, the NES was just in my life since I could even form a memory. You know what I mean? So there's just a lot of this stuff that, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, like, it's the memories and all that are so fuzzy, but it's almost like it's always been a part of my life in some way. So yeah, and I was definitely, as I got older, playing it more. And then when I was about 6, we got a Super Nintendo, and the NES kind of took a back seat until I was maybe, I want to say 14 or 15, and we had a shop nearby that was just, they kind of sold all kinds of used stuff and, mattresses and recliners and just whatever. And it was called Checkouts, and they had lots of used NES games, and I was like, hey, I've still got the NES sitting around, I should see if I could find some stuff. So I kind of had a renewed interest, when I was like in middle school, and then, from then on, just had my very solid appreciation for the system and the games and everything.
Very cool. Yeah, I was a little bit older. Like you said, I'm a little bit older than you. So I was around 8 or 9, and I think it was 1986. My brother could not figure out what he wanted for his 5th birthday, and he had a choice. So we went to this toy store, and my parents were like, "Okay, these are both about the same price, and you want them both." It was an NES control system, with the Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt and the gun and the 2 controllers, or it was this giant transformer that turned into a car carrier. It was this big old thing. It was like $100.
I think I know what you're talking about. I think I had a friend who had one of those, or his
brother. It was like
brother
red, white, and blue. Yeah, it was huge. And then my brother went back and forth, and I was like, please get the NES, please get the NES. Because we had an Atari 2600 at my grandparents' house. And so I already knew the allure of video games and how much better the NES was. So I finally kind of, I think, convinced him to go with the NES. So that's what happened. He picked it up, we brought it home, and I don't think we ever went a day since without playing a video game of some sort. Yeah. And so he and I our when I think of the NES and my youth, my brother is always in that mental picture, because he and I would we're about 2.5 years apart, so we were close enough together in age to kind of learn to play these games together and kind of be on an equal skill level. So whether we were playing against each other or doing co-op, we always had a buddy there to play with us. And so it was fun. We did a lot of multiplayer games. We did a lot of single-player games where we'd take turns. As we go throughout the show, you're going to hear me mention Brendan, my brother, a whole bunch of times. Hopefully I'll have him on the show eventually. I'd love to do a sibling nostalgia episode with him, but he's a busy dude. So yeah, my brother and the NES are like very intertwined in my youth.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we've picked 6 tracks each from games that we enjoyed as kids, or that have some sort of mental warm fuzziness, I guess.
Yeah.
They're mostly good stories for me. I don't know if you have any horrible NES war stories or not, but
I've got several just total tragedies here. No, they're all pretty positive, I think.
Awesome. And then we've also got a couple of testimonials from listeners. So I put up a poll on our VG Embassy Discord, And if you'd like to join the Discord, you can go to thevgembassy.com, and on the right-hand side, there's a little widget column, and at the very top of that column, there's a link to our Discord page. You can click on it and join it. There's no vetting or crazy questions you have to answer to get into our special club. But the poll was using GamePro emojis. Remember GamePro way back in the day? I felt like doing a little nostalgia thing there. Using those emojis, react to this message in regards to how you feel about the NES. So I got 9 responses from that. So 5 of them said that it was great. So it was basically a 4 out of 5. 2 of them said it was a 5 out of 5. And 2 of them said it was only a 3 out of 5, which is interesting. Nobody reacted negatively, though, and I think that's a big point to make, because I don't think anybody looks at the NES and goes, oh, that was a piece of crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't see how you could possibly think that, but yeah.
Well, if you show up anywhere and say I'm anti-NES, you're gonna get dogpiled on. It's too well loved of a system. It was just because there were so many games released for it that there was something for everybody. It's not like the Master System, where if you were a huge RPG fan, you had like 2 selections. There's, regardless of your genre of choice, there was always something there for you. So
yeah, and I was one of the people that gave it a 5, and it's not necessarily because like the NES is my favorite of any given retro system or whatever. It's more just like the cultural importance. It's like to me, it has the cultural importance of the Atari, but with some of the staying power. Like some of those games are still fun, whereas, I'm not saying there are no Atari games that are still fun and playable and everything, but I haven't played them. What I'm trying to say is like just in the grand scheme of like video game systems, to me, this is like number 1 in terms of cultural importance. So I have a lot of both love and respect for the console.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those systems that so many people played during their formative years. I mean, that's who it was marketed to. I would personally give it a 4. I mean, there are some consoles that came later on that I might give a 5 just for game selection and what they kind of meant to me personally, but I would not rate it any lower than a 4 at all.
Yep.
And speaking of that, so we have a couple of quasi-testimonials from some of our Discord denizens. I'll read the first one, and Cam, you can do the second one if you want. The first one's from Utopia Nemo, and so he gave it a little bit of a rating system here. So for graphics, he gave it a 4 out of 5, and he said, for its time, the graphics were fantastic. Developers found ways past the limitations of the system and produced some amazing visuals. The Sega Master System had more and brighter colors, but the NES was impressive in its own right. And that's a good point to make, too, that developers got so familiar with the NES that they were able to make games that looked even better than games on systems that had technically better hardware. The Master System, if it had become as popular as the NES, may have had some fantastic games on there.
Yeah, they had the best cover art, though,
Yes.
That little crisscross.
Those, the white and black grid with the 3-color graphics on there. Yeah, I'm sure that helped those games fly off the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
So for gameplay, fun factor, and challenge, Utopia Nemo gave it a 5 out of 5. He says, again, some of the most iconic, influential games ever. And then he follows it up with, I'm a Sega boy, and I rarely play NES games these days, but I readily admit that it's one of the best systems ever made. It's the only one I've ever skipped school to play. Ooh, have you ever skipped school to play video games?
I would say that I've probably acted more ill than I was so that I could stay home, or because occasionally my mom would let me rent a game if I wasn't, like debilitated sick.
Yeah,
like I could be contagious. And I'd be like, oh, maybe I should get like Smash TV from Blockbuster then. So the answer is kind of yes.
I fully admit to doing that when I was home. My mom would stay home with me, so it would kind of be a no video game thing. I would be kind of forced to sit on the couch upstairs and watch soap operas with her.
So it's kind of punishment.
I only kind of stayed home if I was really sick. But nowadays, I might play hooky from work a day or two to play some video games. But
yeah,
those are mental health days.
That's what we call them now.
And I'm a big boy, and I know when I need them. So
yeah.
Why don't you read Scott McElhone's for us?
Yeah. He says, I'm very fond of the NES, having it been my first game system getting as a kid back in the late 80s. It's the only system I never sold off. Genesis, 32X, CD, 3DO, PS1 all sold, but held on to my NES. I'm actually slowly rehabbing it with new pins, etc., and my carts.
Cool. I sold my Nintendo. Unfortunately, I sold my Nintendo and all my games so that I could get a few SNES games.
Worth it or no?
You know, I had a backup Nintendo because I had one at my grandparents' house. So I did keep some of my favorite games and just move them over there. But, you know, I only had one day out of the week because I went there on Sundays. So it was like one day out of the week. So I don't think I regretted it. I don't look back on that and feel a lot of regret. I don't remember which SNES games I got for those NES games.
I was about to say maybe like Operation Logic Bomb or like I'm trying to think of some real Stunt Race FX or
Oh, I loved that game. that would actually be in my SNES nostalgia episode if we ever do one.
Oh, cool.
And also the fact that I ended up working at Funko and GameStop later on and was able to basically rebuild my collection super, super cheap. I didn't regret selling it off that much.
Right.
I was very into the SNES when it came out, so I don't think I would have used the NES that much anyway.
I'm thinking about it now. I had a pretty decent collection by the time I graduated high school because I would go again to this place, checkouts to pick up, stuff every once in a while. And I remember bringing it up to the house we lived in about an hour away from our hometown that I lived with my roommates in. And sometimes, when you move out of a house and there's 4 or more people involved, things kind of get in a rush and there's kind of a flurry of activity. And so that's where it kind of I lose track of my mental radar of where my console and collection ended up. Cause I'm like, wait, did it go with this person or maybe it went with that person or I took it home and my parents misplaced it or what? So I'm not sure what happened to my stuff. I don't think I had anything that was like worth money. And it's definitely not the kind of thing that I would like bust out all the time just because the NES, anybody who's played the NES knows that just turning it on can be a frustrating experience.
Yeah.
So I'm not really like upset about it, but now I am kind of wondering like, where's that box?
Where did that go? It's like my Virtual Boy that it got strangely lost somewhere along the way and I had to replace. So I know the feeling.
Yep.
Yeah, so with that being said, I think we've pretty much established the fact that nobody hates the Nintendo, and everybody at least thinks the Nintendo is quote-unquote good.
Yeah.
So, good or better. Let's move into our music. So, Cam, what do you have up first for us tonight?
The first one we got here is Raging River from the game Guerrilla War, composed by Yoko Osaka, Toshikazu Tanaka, and Kazuhiro Nishida.
All right, we'll be right back.
All right, that was Raging River from the game Guerrilla War, composed by Yoko Osaka, Toshikazu Tanaka, and Kazuhiro Nishida.
It's a pretty happy track for dirty jungle wartime on a raging river.
Yeah, the horrors of war.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, it's got sort of a determined feel with little bits of glory and hopefulness.
Yeah, I can see that. Mm-hmm.
But either way, I can see where it maybe doesn't fit, again, the horrors of war. But then again, NES games based on war maybe don't do that in general. I haven't played it in years, and I'd actually like to give it a go sometime soon. The memory I have associated with this is actually me being a little bit older. I had a friend across the street who, this was, probably like 92, 93, so definitely into the Super Nintendo era, and he was still rocking the NES, and this is one of the games that he had. And, when you're that old, you're probably not getting, unless you're just good and you have a lot of time to sit with any particular game, you're probably not getting that far into most NES games. At least I wasn't and still can't. But Guerrilla War was nice because it had infinite continues. And that's on top of the fact that it's a pretty fun game and it's co-op. It's like for the longest time, was like one of the only NES games I'd ever beaten, just because all you need is time.
Yeah.
You don't even have to really be good at it.
It's frustration-free gaming.
Exactly. And kind of like, going to free play at the arcade or something. And I will say there is, something does kind of get lost in that experience, the feeling that you have a limited either amount of quarters or amount of lives that you have to deal with. And, if you succeed using that, then you can feel proud of yourself. And if not, then you can try again next time. Yeah. But at the same time, it is nice to have something you can put in to play with your friend, and I won't say breeze through, but make progress and get as far as you feel like getting, or just end up beating it. So we had some fun with that one.
Cool. So this is like an overhead shooter, more or less, where you're scrolling up the screen and just you're rescuing hostages. I'm trying to think of a good. Ikari Warriors is what people usually compare it to.
Yeah, I would say that. I was going to say Smash TV, but it's not really like... It looks like Smash TV, but the setup is completely different. But
yeah. In the arcade, actually, this used an 8-way rotary joystick, so it did have much more of a Smash TV feel, so you could walk in one direction while you're shooting in the other in the arcade version, but obviously they didn't really have a control scheme that worked with that with the NES gamepad. So
I think I've tried the arcade version once and I just got annihilated immediately. And I was like, this is too weird. It's a really neat idea though.
So do you know about the interesting Japanese history this game has?
You hinted at it, and I want to hear more about this.
Yeah, so originally Guerrilla War was released in Japan as Guevara, and it's because the game originally starred Che Guevara and Fidel Castro as Player 1 and Player 2, and they were raiding an unnamed Caribbean island in order to free it from the rule of an unnamed tyrannical dictator. But because, there were very anti-communistic sentiments in the West, SNK did a localization of the game's dialogue and instruction manual for its North American and European releases, and so they switched everything around, made everybody kind of generic, and changed the name to Guerrilla War instead of Guevara. So it's interesting. I guess the Famicom version sells for a lot of money because of the historical impact and how it never came out over here. People are really kind of seeking after it. So and they didn't do a very big print run either. So it's cool that it's got such a big kind of graphical and storyline difference in the Japanese version.
Yeah.
So did you know that you were being a communist every time you played this game when you were a kid?
I just had that feeling that I was part of the proletariat. We were rising up, and we were just gonna take back the power. So maybe a little bit.
I've got this weird urge to get a hammer and sickle tattooed on my chest.
Yeah.
I don't know why. The music is cool. How's the rest of the soundtrack? I'm not too familiar with it.
I would say it's pretty much on this level. I think this is my favorite one. It's all got kind of that. It's not. There's like no backbeats or anything. It's all very kind of stuff, and which is not my favorite, but it works for this because it's more militaristic. And there's some really good melodies and some really solid composition. It won't blow you away or anything, but if you like this track, definitely check out the rest because they're all about as good.
Cool. Yeah, so this, I guess it's technically kind of a spiritual sequel to Ikari Warriors, because they were both made by SNK, and Ikari Warriors came out in the arcades in 1986, and then the arcade version of this game came out in 87, so they were only 1 year apart, and then later on in 87, they released this for the NES. So the NES had only been out for about 2 years by the time this game came out, so it's a pretty early game, so I think graphically and musically, for the era it came out in, it was pretty advanced for its time.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know much about Ikari Warriors. I've watched like a couple videos on it and stuff, but it seems like Guerrilla War was definitely a much improved version of all those mechanics, because I feel like I remember watching it being like, this looks a little, I don't know, laborious, like a little hard to play, so...
Yeah, well, the Angry Video Game Nerd did a Ikari Warriors episode, so that should tell you the quality of
Gotcha.
that title on the NES.
Gotcha, yeah.
He had a lot to say about it, and none of it was good.
Yeah, I think I watched one by Jeremy Parrish, which if the listeners aren't familiar with the NES Works and Game Boy Works and all those, they're really solid videos. I recommend them.
Cool. All right, ready to move on to our next track?
Let's do it.
So I'm following in the same suit with an overhead, vertically scrolling shooter. This one is from a year before yours, though. This is the title theme from Commando. This was released in 1986, composed by Tamayo Kawamoto and Yoshihiro Sakaguchi. Let's hit it. Alright, that was the title theme from Commando, released on the NES in 1986, composed by Tamayo Kawamoto and Yoshihiro Sakaguchi. So yeah, I was kind of talking about how your track was kind of happy sounding for a vertically scrolling one man against an army shoot 'em up, and you threw it right back at me as soon as this song started.
It's like bordering on circus-like. Or like, I mean, yeah, definitely Military Parade, but yeah, it's definitely a little on the lighthearted side.
I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, this like I was telling you, this track also doubles as, I believe, the ending theme as well. So it's one of those songs that it's supposed to pump you up and get you ready to play an action-packed game, but then at the end of the game, once you've completed all the challenges and won the war, this is also doubles as kind of like your victory parade. So I guess it serves kind of a double purpose. I'm not sure if that was, the notes that the composer was given when he or she wrote the song. I guess it works pretty well as both a title theme and an ending theme. And it has those snare rolls at the beginning, so it sounds kind of militaristic,
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, I almost feel like, I mentioned this before, I feel like they were straight up gave them Stars and Stripes Forever or any given John Philip Sousa march, and were like, follow this template. Because even in the Sousa marches, there's I don't know what the musical term would be, but a little section where it sounds like a little more minor, a little more dark, to build some tension to go back into the main thing.
Yeah, right before the loop.
Dun 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 dun, something like that. But it feels like they straight up like just took that template and made their own original music with it. But yeah, it's definitely solid composition either way.
Yeah, this whole game, it's got some interesting pieces of music in the rest of the soundtrack. So you're mainly fighting above ground. You're scrolling upward through areas, shooting dudes left and right, throwing grenades. Once in a while, when you throw a grenade, you'll hit a certain spot and you'll uncover a ladder that goes underground. And you'll go into this kind of, it's not really a bonus area, it's just more like a secret room. And there you can find like 1-ups or like 50,000 points, or, this is one of those games where the more points you get closer and closer to getting a free man, so points are important. Or an extra stash of grenades because you have a limited amount of those. But while you're in those dungeons, you get these really like avant-garde, kind of creepy sounding underground themes. They're like barely music. It was really kind of unique for video game music at that time. And it's a real contrast to like this happy kind of marchy music that you hear at the beginning of the game. So the soundtrack got a little of everything in it.
Huh. Yeah, and that's, so I would say this is like super straightforward kind of music. And so would you compare it like the more ambient stuff, like maybe to Metroid or something, or just even so weird you don't have anything?
Yeah, I'd say kind of like Metroid stuff. That's actually a really good comparison. Or if you took like the Zelda dungeon theme and slowed it like way down, you'd get something like that. Yeah. This was the second NES game I ever owned after the Mario Brothers Duck Hunt cartridge that came with my Nintendo, which was weird because the way I remember this very clearly for some reason. I don't remember the exact store, but we had the Nintendo for a while. It was just Mario Brothers all the time because it's the only game we had. And I think we eventually just convinced our mom to take us out to get a new game because we were just getting sick of Mario. And it wasn't for any special occasion. It was just like, okay, fine, I'll take you out and get you something. She was probably just sick of listening to Mario music over and over again.
Right.
Takes us out. There's this glass case full of video games. We have no clue. Like, we didn't have Nintendo Power yet. I don't think it existed at the time.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of looking at boxes, and this one just caught our eye, or caught my brother's eye. I don't know. My brother was really into like war stuff and guns, and my mom was very anti-gun, which I was very surprised that she even let us get this game.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah.
This was the only violent game we owned. And it was the second game we got. I think after this game, after we brought this game home and played it, my mom took a look at it and was like, oh, I'm not going to get you guys. Like, we weren't allowed to watch G.I. Joe. We weren't allowed to have, like, toy guns. But we had Commando for some weird reason. So we brought this home and played the crap out of it. Because, like I said, I mean, it was just day and night Commando because all we had was this and Mario Brothers, and we were so sick of Mario Brothers. So we got really, really good at it. And I just remember he and I playing, just take turns. It was a 2-player alternating game, and we would just throw grenades everywhere because we knew we figured out that you had to throw grenades to open up these underground areas. And there was really no way, there wasn't any like little tiles that looked different from other tiles that's like, oh, there's where you can throw the grenade. So we would just chuck grenades everywhere, and we would try to remember where we threw grenades. So the next time, when we died and we went back through it, we would try throwing grenades in different areas. And we found like as many underground passages as we possibly could. And we just basically explored the game as much as we had time for. And it was we didn't end up beating the game until probably years and years after we got it. And there was only 4 stages, so it's pretty hard. But I remember once we finally beat it, we were like high-fiving each other and like throwing ourselves parties. It's just one of those things where we worked so hard to finally get to the end of the game.
You want to tell your mom that you killed everybody, but you kind of can't. And...
Mom, we just committed genocide. Yeah. So, I have a lot of really good memories playing this with my brother. We got the NES Advantage for Christmas, and then we used the turbo feature on the controller to shoot like machine gun bullets, because this wasn't like a rapid fire game. You had to push the button every single time you wanted to fire a bullet. So our thumbs would be pretty much like black and blue by the time we finished this game. So the Advantage made it a little bit easier. But yeah, this song is just burned into my brain because I've heard it so much since I was a little kid. And the game holds up. I've played it recently. I still have a lot of fun with it. for people who aren't familiar with it, I'd just give it a shot, because I think you'll find some good stuff to play when you're playing this one. Very smooth gameplay, very fast gameplay. If you die, it's your fault. The game doesn't like cheese you, or there's no like really bad controls or bad hit detection. Like, it's really solidly programmed. So it's definitely worth a shot.
Yeah, and I've got a couple notes there. One of them is I love when designers, add in secrets and stuff, but also screw them for doing it like that. Like, I think about A Link to the Past and how occasionally you'd find something under a bush. So then you felt obligated to chop down every bush.
Yep.
And it's just maddening after a while, it's you go crazy doing it. And the other thing is about conservative, like protective parents, is I feel like there's always that exception, that weird exception. And I wouldn't say my parents were they definitely weren't overprotective. Like I had plenty of, violent games and all that kind of, I mean, not super violent, but I could watch G.I. Joe, we'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But then one day my mom comes home with a copy of Doom 2. And
wow.
Up to this point, like, I wasn't allowed to play Mortal Kombat. Like, that was where the line was drawn, because that's, that was the bloody game that they had seen on the news or whatever. But then one day Doom 2, and I'm like, okay, cool. And that was I've never been the same since.
Interesting, because I know your family's like, you're active in the church and everything. Like, for her to bring home like this satanic violent game,
she had no idea.
Kind of mind blowing.
She had no idea. And the thing is, I mean, just going by the cover of that giant demon thing and the Marine with the weird haircut and everything, you would think that would be enough to turn her off. But I think the story I remember, and this is like a different nostalgia thing because I was significantly older at the time, but I think she was just at the store, whatever store it might have been, Software Etc. or something, and asked the clerk, well, what's hot with the kids these days?
Okay.
And he was like, Doom 2. And,
I'm sure that dude had a headband and sunglasses.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was the baddest dude at Software Etc. Not that it takes much, but anyway, that was always, again, the weird exception. But, fun times.
Yeah, are you familiar with the term the Streisand effect?
No.
So, and this is it sounds off topic, but I'm gonna bring it back full circle.
I trust you.
So back in the I think it was like the late 60s, early 70s or whatever, some tabloid magazine ran a picture of Barbra Streisand's mansion, just like being like, look at her big mansion. You know how tabloids do. They're just anything celebrity is like. And they found out where she lived, and they it was on a river, so they sailed down the river. They took a picture of the house, and Barbra Streisand went insane, and she went public, and she was like, this magazine needs to take this picture off of their magazine or whatever, and I'm going to sue, and I'm going to go crazy, and blah, 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 blah. And the thing is, nobody really cared. It was just like a little picture in the corner of the magazine, just saying, like, this is Barbra Streisand's house. Like, nobody paid much attention to it. But she made such a big stink out of it that it became, like, national news. Like, Barbra Streisand wants this picture taken down, and suddenly the picture of the house was, like, on TV, and it was, like, everywhere. So she ended up...
So, like, the outrage becoming the story over the thing the outrage was over?
Well, yeah, the person that wanted to hide it ended up making the story bigger than it was.
Gotcha. Okay.
So this was the thing that happened with my mom, is that, for us it was like, okay, G.I. Joe, people shooting each other, whatever. But my mom was so adamant about no guns, no violence. She made it more enticing for us. So that's all we wanted to do, is we would just find sticks that looked like guns, and we probably wouldn't have done that if she let us get guns, because the whole taboo nature of it wouldn't have been there. So
yeah, the mystique and the allure of the forbidden thing, the thing you're not supposed to do.
Exactly.
We've got a kid that's almost 2, so we know all about that. The most fun thing to do is the thing we've told her not to do.
Give her all the guns. Just give her all the guns, and that way she won't want the guns later on.
Yep. We're like, pretend that's a gun. Pretend that's a gun. Here's a real gun. No. But it's always a good time.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. All right, so let's move on to our next track, and we'll get some superhero business going on. What you got for us?
Oh yeah, I have yet another tie-in with something you said, and this is a game that I owned because I was not warned about it. There was no internet, and I didn't see anything about it in a magazine. But this is Captain America and the Avengers. Yes, for the NES. And this is the Captain America stage theme, composed by Shinji Momoi and Takafumi Miura.
All right, let's hit it.
We are back. That was the Captain America stage theme from Captain America and the Avengers, composed by Shinji Momoi and Takafumi Miura. I think the first time I said Shinji, but Shinji Momoi. I'll just go ahead and say this track is everything I appreciate about old school video game music composition.
I agree.
You've got a lot of good melodies, but then you've also got a lot of good counterpoint between the two, like higher register voices, and you would know better than me whether those are the square waves or what. But because you've got parts where they're playing together, and then you've got parts where they're kind of filling in each other's spaces, and then below all that you've got the bass, which again is just laying down a nice groove. But then sometimes you'll have a little break in the melody, and it'll come up a little bit higher, and it does those little do 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 do. And again, I don't know if this like tied up in my nostalgia, but there's something like, I don't know, like it has like a melancholy feel to me, or like an emotional feel. Like it feels like it's conveying something that maybe I can't quite put my finger on. But again, I would just say that this hits all the marks for me in terms of like what you can do with, 3 voices in a noise channel. Like It's just really cool.
So, yeah, to answer your question, that's definitely the 2 squares doing the melody work and the triangle doing the bass. So that's a very traditional way that most composers set up their NES music. I don't know, I personally didn't hear a lot of melancholy. Like, the first thing I actually imagined when that kind of dun 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 was like Alfonso Ribeiro, like dancing the Carlton. Like, it has that just kind of a very like swingy kind of feel to it.
Yeah, I can see that. But then again, part of that's probably just coming up from the fact that it's so ingrained in my head that, like, when I say melancholy, maybe it's more meaning that that Japanese word that was that they talked about in VGM,
wabi-sabi.
Yeah, where it's like longing for the past or something, and it obviously is going to have more emotional weight for someone like me that grew up with it. But yeah,
your feeling is more from association than by the actual music itself.
I couldn't say that for sure.
Okay,
but because I can't unhear it as a kid. But that would be my guess, is that, yes.
Maybe the negative feelings were based on just playing this game.
Well, yes. Do you want me to get into that story?
Absolutely, that's what we're here for, bro.
Well, I didn't know if you had something else you wanted to say about the music.
No, go for it.
Okay, so this was around the time, I don't know when exactly that that Captain America and the Avengers arcade game came out, but that one was a banger. That was one of my favorite arcade games. I loved it. We had one at our local arcade, and I would always throw quarters at it when I had the chance. And I just loved it. I didn't know anything about those particular characters. You know, this was a time where X-Men was huge, and Spider-Man to a lesser degree. You know, for me, like the filter being Fox Kids. It just looked like Vision is in his all white suit, and you've got like the old school comic, you know, bright colors for all the other people. And so I just thought it was great. I think at some point I played the Genesis port, like when I borrowed a Genesis from somebody. But then one year for Easter, which I don't remember ever getting a video game for Easter, but this one time, like my parents were like, "Do you want us to get you a game?" And again, I already had a Super Nintendo, so I'm kind of scratching my head now as to why I would. I think this is before the Super Nintendo port of that same game, which was also really bad. But anyway, I ended up getting this from our local KB Toys and bringing it home and being like, what is this? Because you can only play as Captain America or Hawkeye, who arguably are the lamest of the four, you know, if you're subtracting the two flying characters with like projectile, you know, fire and laser beams and stuff, and you're just like, you've got a guy with a bow and arrow and a guy with a shield.
Yeah.
And you know, they're great characters or whatever, but when you're 6-7 years old, you want to be the guy that can fly and the guy that can shoot fire out of his head. You know,
it's all about laser beams. Yeah, exactly. You've got the two Earthbound guys, and I realize, you know, it's an NES game, there are limitations, and this is what they chose to, you know, limit was the type of characters you could actually use. But I mean, everything, it's not a beat 'em up, it's a like an action platformer, and it's not a very good one at that. I would even call some of it buggy, because I remember as a kid, like, there being this I say boss fight in quotes, because like it was just enemies that kept coming, and I could never figure out, like, you had to do something to make them stop, and I couldn't figure it out. I know that's a very like vague, non-specific story, but I'm just saying, not a good game at all. But the soundtrack is, you know, I would put it up there. It's pretty good. Yeah, the music seems to be the shining beacon for the home ports, because none of the home ports were really that good. I think the Genesis version was the best of the bunch as far as the three major ones go.
Yeah.
Plus, the music for the Genesis version was done by Hitoshi Sakimoto, which is like a phenomenal soundtrack. It's one that you should just listen to even if you don't care about playing the game.
I agree. And I'll jump in real quick to say that the vocal samples in the Genesis are hilarious. And you should check out a Let's Play of it, because they're so bad that you'll get a kick out of it.
Yeah, my dream version of this game would be to have the arcade game mixed with the Genesis soundtrack. I think that would just be like the match made in heaven. Yeah. I don't really have any nostalgia or experience with the NES game, but they did have a so there's a sports/arcade complex in the next town over from me. It's actually called The Only Game in Town, because it's the only one for miles and miles in any direction. But, you know, it's a place they have like a driving range and a mini golf course and go-karts and stuff like that. And they had some arcade games. And it was the first place that my brother and I ever saw Captain America and the Avengers. And my grandparents would take us there, and my grandparents used to spoil us. So they would just give us pockets and pockets full of quarters.
Yeah.
And so I think my brother and I got enough quarters out of them in order to finally beat this one while we were there at the only game in town. So that's my nostalgic memory, at least for this title, not necessarily the version, though.
Yeah,
but I think it's one of those arcades where they turn the sound down on every single game, so I never had any experience with the music until I was recommended the Genesis version by somebody in the VGM community at some point.
Yeah, and it's like, even then, I mean, could you hear the vocal samples in the arcade version?
Couldn't hear anything, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're pretty great. It's like, you know, anytime you die, your guy goes boom, and there's a lot of the part I will always remember is Quicksilver runs by a certain point, and I think the first stage, and gives you a little power up. And whoever you are, they all have the same voice, and he goes like, "Thank you, Quicksilver."
Yeah.
And it's so corny. I love it.
I've played it in MAME, you know, more recently than that.
Oh, okay.
So I was able to actually, you know, the Avengers, America still needs your help. They're so over the top. It's great.
I love it.
So, speaking of strongmen, let's move on to our next track. This is appropriately titled Arm Wrestling from Track and Field 2. This came out in 1988, composed by Konami composer Jun Funahashi. Alright, brother, that was Arm Wrestling from Track and Field 2. Came out in 1988, composed by Jun Funahashi. And for those of you that listen to VGM podcast Rhythm and Pixels, yes, Rob Nichols did feature this track on a very recent episode. I think it was the Panic episode. And I picked this track just before he played it on the show, but I decided to keep it in because it's so awesome, and I felt like it's a very Mad Gear track. It's arm wrestling, and plus it's just this kind of rockin' badass beat 'em up style tune. So it's kind of this is my tribute to the work that Cam has done in the field of VGM covering. So cheers to you.
I appreciate that. That means a lot, actually. And I do feel like this would not be out of place in any given beat 'em up or, you know, brawler type fighting game or whatever. This is a good one.
Yeah, well, Jun Funahashi's worked on like the Ninja Turtle beat 'em ups games, so I feel like this could have been a selection from one of the Ninja Turtle games, and it would have fit right in, you know? But this game in particular is, we got it at a mall. I don't know why. I think it was one of those times where we were just looking at a wall of video games and my parents were like, you can get one. Like, they did that every once in a while, and I don't know why, but it would just put us on the spot. Like, it would always be when we were in front of like 700 video games, and they'd be like, do you want one? And we'd be like, we have to pick.
Yeah.
I don't know why. My brother just picked Track and Field 2, and I went along with him. And we brought it home, and it was really good. I think we had already had those Advantage controllers, because this is one of those games where you really have to like pound as hard as possible on the A and B buttons to like run fast enough to do the triple jump or do the hurdles.
It was Mario Party mini games before Mario Party, sort of.
That's a very good way of putting it, yeah. And the controls were not always easy, and a lot of them did definitely benefit from having that turbo feature on the Advantage. I mean, you can call it cheating if you want. We were like 8 years old. We did not care at the time. Even using the turbo buttons, the games aren't easy. We still had difficulties, you know, getting the scores that you needed to advance to the next week in the I don't know what you call it, the championship mode or whatever. Yeah. But I do remember us playing over and over. Like, there's so many different games in Track and Field 2 that you could just play to your heart's content, and all of them are pretty fun, and the music is fantastic. It's really well done, just kind of like that traditional hard-hitting Konami style music. There are a whole bunch of different national anthems from all around the world, from all the participating countries, all done in that kind of Konami style. Mm-hmm. You know, we didn't know it at the time, but looking back on the soundtrack, it's really cool to kind of hear all those traditional themes done in the Konami way. Graphics were great. They were like just full screen runners, like when you're doing the triple jump, the guy takes up practically the entire screen. Some decent animation, lots of vocal samples. Like, they really went all out in this game. And nowadays, a game like Track and Field, they're kind of like shovelware titles, and you don't really get that really good quality that they put into this one. Arm wrestling was just one of those games where it was really simple. It was just who could pound the A button faster. than the other one. So I remember my brother and I would just sit there. We'd both have turbo on the A button. We'd both just hold the button down and watch the two guys like straining against each other and go back and forth and back and forth. You know, we can do that infinitely. And then after a while, it would be like, okay, we'll finally play it for real. And then we just turn the turbo dials all the way down and then just pound as hard as we possibly can. And I think I usually won because I was a couple years older and just had more developed thumbs or something. But, you know, a lot of fun. This is a game that I go back to all the time. And there's just so many, like I said, so many different games. There's always something new or something that I've forgotten about that I could play in this game. Everything from like clay duck shooting to kayaking to archery to track running. It's just super cool stuff. So do you have any experience with this one at all?
I don't. And I just started getting familiar with it a couple of years ago when I downloaded the soundtrack. And it's one of those ones that's great because it's all, I mean, again, you see the Konami logo on there, or if you know it's Konami, you know you're going to get something good. And even then, like, even if you don't, you start listening to it a couple tracks in, you're like, this is Konami. Just immediately, just from the drums, really.
Yeah.
But it's one of those ones that has so many other samples and stuff in it, it's almost annoying to go through because if you get, you know, because if they don't put that patch of stuff at the end, then you're basically going through like foul, you know,
disqualify,
disqualify, and then like bad but good, like samples of applause and cheering and that kind of thing.
Samples, yeah.
There's so many of them. Like it's a lot. I'm talking like 15 or something. But yeah, the ending theme I would also recommend if the listeners aren't familiar with it because it's a good one.
The ending theme was like that one track that I never heard because I was never able to get to the end of the championship. So when I was finally able to find like the NES sound files on the web, that was the first track that I went to because I was like, I've heard this entire soundtrack and I love it. I need to hear that last piece of the soundtrack that I've never heard before. So I was not disappointed. It's a really good tune.
Yeah. Is this one PowerPad compatible?
I don't think so. I've never had a power pad, so I never tried.
Okay.
I would not be surprised if you told me that it was, though. I know the original track and field was not. All right, so my arms are very, very sore. What have you got for us next?
Oh boy. I have Ivan Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road, which is still for the NES and not the Super NES. This track is Cliffhanger, and it was composed by your boy, David Wise, Mark Betteridge, and Sam Powell.
Sounds fun.
All right, that was Cliffhanger from Ivan Iron Man Stewart's Super Off-Road for the regular Nintendo. Composed by David Wise, Mark Betteridge, and Sam Powell.
Fun little tune.
Yeah, it's a good one. I mentioned when it was playing that I never got to hear this one in-game because it's apparently much later in the game, and Super Off-Road is not easy, so...
Yeah, this game plays kind of like RC Pro-Am, or it's like one of those things where you see the whole track on your screen, right? And then you've got to just use your D-pad like a steering wheel, more or less, jump it up and down. And
yes.
My wife said when she was a little girl, her dad had the 4-player version of this game, like the arcade cabinet in his garage, and they used to play it all the time. I was so jealous.
That's awesome. Were there like 4 steering wheels or?
Yeah, I think so. It was like the full deluxe cabinet.
That's awesome.
I was like, man, and I was like, so what happened to it? And he's like, I don't know, I just lost track of it. I'm like, how do you lose track of something like that?
It's pretty big, dude. I've played it in the arcade once, I think, and it was a similar experience to Guerrilla War. Like I couldn't hack. Like it the steering wheel had a lot of momentum once you got it, turning.
Yep.
And so you had to you had to be at 10 and 2 and actually very controlled with your motions, because otherwise you just go in circles. And playing on a D-pad, while I had much more practice doing that, it wasn't a much different experience. Like it was very easy to take a turn like slightly too sharp and end up like going in circles or something like that. And I just remember like this game is just my takeaway memory is just chaos.
Yeah, it's really unforgiving.
Yeah. I'm having trouble remembering like if it was always 4 racers going at one time, or if it was just, you could have up to 4 players and then more computer racers. But again, like you're trying to keep track of your car because you're seeing the entire track at once. So unlike Pro-Am or RC Pro-Am, like you're not even zoomed in on your own person.
Yeah.
So you're having to really keep track of your color and everything. But the reason I brought this one up as like a nostalgia one is we did own the game and I did have a lot of fun with it on my own. But as far as I can remember, this is the only game I ever played with the multi-tap. Like a 4-person NES experience. And it was at my grandparents' house, and I don't even remember. I guess they must have had one there. Not my grandparents, but we had some friends next door that we'd play video games with or just hang out with and do whatever. And they must have had one and brought it over. And I just remember having such a blast and thinking like it was just the craziest thing to be playing, 4 people on a single console and everybody having such a good time and everything. It's a cool game for sure.
It is funny how having more than 2 people just like multiplies the fun. You'd think there would be like a diminishing return after a while, but it's like the more people you have playing, the more of a blast everybody seems to have. So
yeah.
I remember Bomberman with multiple people. I don't think I ever played the NES version of this game. I did play it on the SNES, and I played it in the arcades. And yeah, the arcades are the same thing as you. It's like the steering wheels, I think, they just turn infinitely. So like it doesn't tell you like where the steering stops, so you have to like rotate your steering wheel back a number of times, and there's no real force feedback, so it's just...
For all the kids out there, is basically a fidget spinner, but a steering wheel.
Yeah, that kind of makes a truck just do things.
Like, once you got it going, it just... There's no friction.
Yeah. It's sad. I actually like the D-pad control a lot better. So I would say if you have a choice between the giant arcade machine and an SNES, I don't know why you'd ever have that choice, but if there was a choice of one to play, the SNES version is probably the better version of this game, even better than the arcade version, which is kind of rare, you know?
Yeah.
I think plus it had music by Tim Follin, so you can't really go wrong with that.
Oh yeah. I remember that now. There are some pretty good tracks on that soundtrack, and I remember really liking the Fandango one specifically.
Oh
so,
yeah, it's good stuff.
Along with checking out this soundtrack, if you like the one you just heard, either way, go check out the Off-Road soundtrack for Super Nintendo. It's a good one. It rocks.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of soundtrack, we didn't really talk about the music for this one much. So when I first heard it, I was like, oh, this doesn't really sound too much like Dave Wise. Like, I'm very familiar with all of his Nintendo works, but I think it's a very basic kind of tune. Like there's hints, like around 35, 36 seconds in, there's those notes that have kind of like a reverb on them, which is very Battletoads-ish or very David Wise-ish. Yeah. But the rest of it's just very kind of unfiltered, unmolested, just square channel notes, which is kind of, I was going to say very rare for David Wise to do, which is kind of a pun, but you don't normally hear stuff this simple from him. So I found that really intriguing.
Yeah, and of course it could have been one of the other two guys. There's something about the progression of the chords, just the doot, 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 that sounds like something David Wise could have written, because I feel like a lot of times he writes in that kind of like, I don't know how to put it, but just kind of cool. I don't mean like chilled out, I just mean like cool rockin' kind of vibe. Beyond that, it's not super characteristic of his stuff, so I'm wondering if it was one of the other two guys.
Yeah, well, just historically speaking, usually when you see... Because Dave Wise was the only composer at Rare forever, especially back when this game was made. So I'm assuming, as they did with most NES credits back in the day, that Mark Bedridge and Sam Powell were probably... sound driver and sound effects guys.
Yeah.
A lot of times they credit them together with the composer itself. So
that's true.
I don't want to not credit them for the music, but I'm just saying, historically speaking, and just an educated guess, I'm pretty sure Dave Wise was the only guy that ever did music for them during the NES days.
Yeah. What a prolific dude, man.
Oh yeah.
It was so funny hearing him on Legacy Music Hour. And Brent just asking him all these questions, and him, for a lot of it, being like, I don't know. I don't remember. Like, I was pumping out this crap like you wouldn't believe. So there's I don't remember if you asked him if he composed this, or if, Sam or Mark did.
Well, he was asking him like really, really specific, like what was your decision to make this note, this note run like the way it was? And I'm sure for him it was like, what groceries did you buy that week? It's just he put so much stuff out that it's hard to keep it all straight.
Exactly. There was the one that cracked me up the most was he was talking about, I think it's like the first level theme from Donkey Kong Country, and it has a hard transition into something that has nothing to do with the rest of it. And Brent was like, what was like the inspiration behind that? He's like, I wanted to move on to something else, so I completely stopped what I was doing and started. It wasn't that exactly, but it was something like that. He's like, I don't know, I just did it.
He's a man of brute force, and that's why lots of people love him, because he's just very direct with the emotions he wants to convey in his music, and it works, so he can't complain.
That's exactly right. He's a wise man.
He is. He's also a David man.
Yep, giving you all the frankincense, gold, and myrrh that you could ever ask for in a video game soundtrack.
Exactly. I guess Mark Bedridge and Sam Powell were the other two wise men.
Yeah, maybe following that North Star of video game music.
Well, it'll help keep their steering wheels aligned, hopefully.
Oh gosh, please.
All right, before we get any more off track, let's move on to our next track. This is a unique one for me, and I've got a really weird story behind this one. This is stages 1 through 6 from Stinger. This came out on the NES in 1987 from Konami, composed by Kiyohiro Sada, Shinya Sakamoto, Satoe Terashima, and Kinuyo Yamashita. Let's take a listen. All right, that was stages 1 through 6 from Stinger. That was released by Konami in 1987, composed by Kiyohiro Sada, Shinya Sakamoto, Satoe Terashima, and Kinuyo Yamashita. Fun game. So this game was like one of the first games that I ever played on the NES, even before I owned an NES. The kid that used to live across the street from my childhood home, his name was JP, and he was this little kid with this big old speech impediment. Every single R was like a hard W. He was adorable. He owned an NES, so we used to go over to his house and sit in his bedroom.
Hey, come over, play Stinger.
Exactly. That's exactly how it sounded. So we would go to his house and we would play some NES games. And this is the weird thing about this game. So this is the first game in the Poppin' Twin B series, which is, a lot of people know about it nowadays, but for some reason, when it came to the US, they called it Stinger. So this is a cross between a horizontal shoot-'em-up and a vertical shoot-'em-up. You can fire weapons in front of you, but then you can also drop bombs onto the ground, and you can... all the enemies are... It's like probably one of the first shoot-'em-ups ever made. Everything's very, very cartoony. There's like weird Buddha statues all over the ground. Just some very strange graphics. So for some reason, JP's cartridge either had some dirt or some dust or something in there. All the graphics were corrupted, but they were corrupted the same, like the game would start first time every time you put it in the NES, and the graphics would be corrupted the same way every time you put it in there. So there was probably something wrong with the circuitry or something, and nobody cared or knew. So my first experience with this game for like months and months and months was thinking that was the normal way the game looked, with everything all garbled. I just thought it was a bunch of really crappy looking graphics, like shooting each other. It was really strange. So I remember renting it later on and taking it home and putting it in my Nintendo and just seeing everything like really crisp and clear, and the graphics finally made sense. And I was like completely blown away. I was like, what is going on? Have you been fooling me and telling me that I've been playing this corrupted game thinking it was normal for like the past 3 months? It was just the most bizarre feeling I've ever had, suddenly seeing this game I thought was totally weird suddenly like make sense. I mean, the game was still weird, but I don't know, man. Have you ever had anything like that where you've like had a game that just behaved bizarrely?
The closest thing I can think to that is back in the early 2000s having some mix CDs. Back when, this is like, at least for me, like the first, few years that I could burn my own CDs.
Yeah.
And, basically just making mixes of stuff where I didn't like the whole album. I just like 1 or 2 tracks. And I remember one of them being Popular by Nada Surf, and it had a skip in it. And every time I hear that song now, I like, I feel the skip coming and it doesn't.
Yep.
Like if I hear it on the radio or something. And so that's the closest thing I can think of to an experience like that, where just kind of once you hear it normally, it's not quite the same as what you're talking about, because it's almost like the skip version, like that's the correct version in my head.
Yes, no, I've had the same experience with music as well, so I know where you're coming from. But yeah, I mean, I feel it's like the same thing. Like the wrong version to you is the right version, because that's the version that you experienced.
Sure. But yours sounds more like, in a way, that it was like a relief to not be looking at complete, abstract pixel art, and you actually can kind of tell what you're supposed to be looking at.
It was like looking at a Picasso painting for years and years and years, and then suddenly looking at it and it looks like a standard photograph. It was just like all of a sudden everything like looked like something I recognized instead of weird jagged shapes. I don't know. I wish I could go back and play that original version of the game again, because like I can picture it in my head, but you can't like recreate that. Like you can't
no way.
Put the right amount of dust on the right pin to screw things up the proper way. So it's just one of those experiences I'll never ever be able to get back, and that's kind of sad in a way,
Yeah. Still though, I love the story, and that's exactly the kind of stuff I was hoping we would be hearing with a show like this. Is just very specific stories that didn't happen to anybody else except your friend.
It's true. It's true. Oh, we actually called him over too. Like when we rented the game, we were like, JP, you got to come see this.
Yeah.
Brought him downstairs, put the game on, and he was like, what? Completely blown away. And so I don't know if he went home and tried to clean his cartridge and if it worked or not, but I don't. That's where my memory of that whole situation stops. But I remember him being very concerned that our game looked very different from what his was.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Speaking of the music, I mean, this is a great track. Like, it plays through. The first, well, I think there's only 7 stages, so the first 6/7 of the game. But it's a great little breezy track. It's got that like pre-Konami sound. It doesn't have those sampled drums that they relied upon so much in their later games, but it's just a very nice, easy to listen to kind of track. This is one of those like Blue Sky style games. Everything is very vibrant. The colors are very saturated. Looks like it's, straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon. So I think this music really kind of fits the theme of what you're looking at. So they did a good job on the soundtrack with this one.
Yeah, and I mean, even with you kind of describing the gameplay, I'll just echo what I said when we were listening to it. Was it reminds me of Bubble Bobble, because of course you're hearing that theme a lot, but then also there's some kind of like prototypical NES composition stuff with the octave bass line, and it's not throughout, but you hear a lot of that boop 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 kind of stuff, and it sounds like it could have come from any given Taito or Natsume or whatever other NES developer at the time, but it's still good, and I like it.
Yeah, it's just that kind of archetypal, traditional video game Japanese music of the era,
Right.
Cool. All right, well, that's all I've got for that one. So what do you got next?
All right, this is one I'm kind of stoked about, just to talk about in general. This is the stage theme from Dragon Power, composed by Toshiko Kawanishi. All right, that was the stage theme from Dragon Power, composed by Toshiko Kawanishi. Got it that time.
Hey, you got it right the first time.
Yeah!
Nailed it.
All right, so my experience with this game, and it's sort of notorious, so some of you may already kind of know where I'm going with it, but I played it as a kid. We owned it. I wouldn't characterize it as a great game. It's kind of confusing. A lot of it is just badly designed. The boss battles, especially, and again, if you've played it, you know what I'm talking about. It's just war of attrition. It's hit the guy as much as you can and hope that you don't die.
Yeah.
There's no dodging. There's no ducking under. Like most of the bosses are significantly larger than you, so you can't jump over them without getting hurt. There's a pattern, but you can't avoid it. You can't hit them without being hit. It's stupid. There's a lot of cutscenes. The music by itself, I mean, you can kind of get a little bit of like stereotypical like Asian music. To me, it almost sounds like a Westerner composing what he thinks is Asian music.
Interesting.
But there's other parts that are just like do 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 do. Like just straight up, what you would consider like cliche, almost offensively cliche music. None of it's bad, and the level theme I feel like is pretty good, and you hear it a lot. And weirdly, even though it's repetitive, it doesn't get old. I will say that. Again, a lot of confusing gameplay mechanics, but as a 4 or 5-year-old. And living in an America that had not yet been introduced to anything related to Dragon Ball, I just thought this is the world of this game, and that's that. So fast forward 10 years, when Dragon Ball Z starts to become a big deal, I get pretty into it for maybe a year or two. And at a certain point, this little bubble of a memory comes up in my head, and I'm like, what about, there was that NES game where you're talking to a turtle at one point. There's a turtle in this show. You talk to a pig at one point. There's a pig in this show. You talk to an old man doesn't look like that old man, but still. And then there's somebody that straight up looks like Bulma. And then so what I ended up doing was going again to this checkouts place. And this was before, like, there was a Funko Land kind of in my area, but I don't think we even had it at this point. I think, I was in my later teens before we got one. But and I remember asking them, and they characterized it as like a Dragon Ball ripoff, and which is not quite accurate. And so it was still years and years before I got to actually play it again and look up information on it and be like, okay, what happened was they made a Dragon Ball game. And then when they brought it to North America, just changed a lot of stuff. Like a lot of the names, I mean, obviously it's called Dragon Power. The cover art of the game is just some random like karate master doing a jump kick who doesn't even look like the sprite in the game, which obviously this happened a lot back in the NES days.
Right.
But no, especially by the cover itself, there's no indication it's associated with Dragon Ball. But then once you're like somewhat familiar with all the stuff associated with Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, then you would put that together, and that's exactly what I did. It was just kind of like, oh, this was associated. And again, like finding out that later on that's what had happened, that they had they basically had a Dragon Ball game, and then for whatever reason when they brought it over here decided to change a lot of the stuff. So it was just sort of a weird experience for me to have this memory, this little thought, little memory bubble in my head, and have those two things like connect and be like, wait a minute, that's okay. It was just kind of cool to find out later on that I was right, and that there was a reason for me to have thought there are some similarities.
That's cool. It's also really funny that there are two games in this show so far that you've picked that have been heavily modified for the Western market.
Yeah.
Between Guerrilla War and Dragon Power. I never played this game. I didn't even really know about this game. I probably, if it were at one of the rental shops that I used to go to when I was a kid, I probably saw that generic cover and was like, whatever.
Yeah.
So you just ended up with this game like on a whim? Like you saw it and just bought it? Or?
Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of these games that we owned, I'm not really sure how we got them because, again, being so young and it being maybe my brother thought it was a good idea to get them, or, a lot of them I just couldn't tell you. So as far as how we obtained it, I genuinely have no idea. It could have just been a random present. It could have been one of those things that like your parents did and were like, pick a game.
Yeah.
Off the Toys R Us shelf or whatever.
So a lot of these games are just like they've always existed. It's just been a part of your life.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, just my earliest memory, the NES has always existed to me. It's always been in my life. So the games are kind of a similar story. There's a few that I can be like, okay, the Captain America one, for instance, I can remember, when and how we got it, but a lot of them I don't.
Gotcha. It's such a foreign concept for me.
Yeah.
Being a little bit older.
I understand.
All right, so I wish I had some memories about this one that I could share, but nope. And I don't watch I don't watch Dragon Ball Z either, so I am doubly useless for this particular game.
It's all good. Like I said, as a game, it's worth skipping over, but in terms of just the the story behind it, it's interesting.
Yeah. So let's move on to our next one because I know we both have some experience with this one, so it should be a fun thing to talk about.
Yep.
I'm going to play a track called Grand Canyon from everybody's favorite Ferrari game, Rad Racer. This came out in 1987, composed by a virtually unknown guy named Nobuo Uematsu.
Uematsu?
And that was Grand Canyon from Rad Racer, the 1987 Squaresoft release composed by Nobuo Uematsu. And yes, he did do stuff other than Final Fantasy, believe it or not. This was, I think, one of his first games. Definitely the first game I've ever heard his music in. Very big departure from his Final Fantasy music. He was influenced by early 50s American rock in his early days of composing. So a lot of the tracks on the Ridge Racer games, on the Rad Racer games are...
Sorry.
Two of my favorite racing series, so I always get the mix up. That would be so dope. But yeah, he really enjoyed that genre, that era of American music, so he really brought that into a lot of his compositions. This was always the track that I would pick to play on the virtual radio while I was playing Rad Racer, because, I don't know, that intro, dun 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 dun, it just sounded so cool to me.
Yeah.
Just really hard and heavy and rockin'. Just made me feel like a badass while I was driving that Ferrari into various street signs and other cars around the track. And this was a game, I think maybe the third or fourth NES game that I owned after I got Commando, so this one got a heck of a lot of playtime in my house too, between my brother and I, and we got pretty darn good at it. So Cam, you said you owned this game too, right?
Yep, I had 1 and 2. And gosh, just to talk about the music for a second, like again, you would never guess it is who it is, composing it.
Yeah.
But it's still very good. Like, I really like the main lead. Like, there's just so much feeling in, I don't know the technicality of how that was pulled off, like how it kind of like fades in and fades out a little bit with the volume, and there's some vibrato on there maybe, but like,
yeah,
it's just masterfully done. And then, like you were saying, that little breakdown, little dun 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 dun, and then it brings in the harmony, the dun 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 dun. Like, it's just really well done, and builds some nice little bit of tension there. So I was gonna ask, was it both of these games that had the 3D option, or was it just the first one?
I am not nearly as familiar with the second one as I am the first one, so, because I remember when we were gathering tracks and putting together a document for this show, you had Rad Racer and Rad Racer 2 on your list, and I was like, oh, pick Rad Racer 2, because I want to pick Rad Racer 1.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, I only rented Rad Racer 2, so I don't think I ever really tried to do the 3D mode. I remember having the 3D glasses that came with the game. They got misplaced after a while when I was a kid, so I wasn't able to use it that much, but I know for sure it was in the first one.
Yeah, and that's, like, I didn't know what that was for the longest time. Like, I would just hit select and be like, this looks insane. Okay, I'm going to go back to how it was.
This must be LSD mode.
Yeah, it was a stinger situation. I didn't know what was going on. But I don't remember even when I found out that's what it was supposed to be. And by that time, the glasses were long gone. So I never experienced it as it was supposed to be. But it's a really neat idea.
Yeah, definitely. And this was the first game that I ever knew about cheats on as well. So there's this trick you can do, like, so when the game starts up, when you boot up the game, it goes to a demo mode where, the computer's just racing and it shows you like the attract mode kind of a thing. And if you started hitting the B button, the lights on the tachometer on the bottom of the screen would start to light up in sections, like 2 lights at a time. And if you, depending on how far up you made the meter go, so if you had it halfway up, and I think if you held down down left and hit A and start at the same time or something like that, I don't remember what it was, but you would start at a different stage instead of stage 1, depending on how many lights were lit up.
Oh, cool.
So I saw that in a Nintendo Power or something, and really use that to kind of explore all the tracks and get good at just the tracks that I wasn't very good at. Because I could get up to stage 4 pretty easily, but I would start dying there. So I would just starting at stage 4 and eventually got really good at all of them and was able to just beat the game easily all the time. And I think if you pressed the B button 30 something times and then held that button combination, you would go straight to the end of the game, so you could kind of enjoy the end music and see the little animation at the end. So It was fun. I felt like I was kind of hacking the game, because I'd never was unfamiliar with the concept of cheats. So I was like, oh cool, I'm just manipulating all this stuff.
Yeah.
and it was a lot of fun. So I had a lot of fun with this game. It was cool. It helped me like get into the concept of driving and staying in the lanes, and prepared me for a lot of racing games to come on different systems as I went throughout my gaming life. So
I could totally see that and see this as a primer for something like Top Gear.
Oh, for sure.
Or, I mean, any given racing game that's in this style.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the faux 3D thing kind of going, and yeah. And talking earlier about like when we got games or why we got games, like as far as when, I have no idea when we got, Rad Racer 1 and 2, but I can tell you it was 100% because of my brother, because he was like car nuts growing up. And it's probably the same thing with off-road, is because, as much as I enjoyed that game, it's really hard to imagine myself being like, yeah, I want the game where you drive around in circles. So that's like, I don't have a ton of gaming memories with my brother, because he just didn't, first of all, we had quite a bit of age gap, but also he just didn't latch on the gaming the same way that I did.
Yeah.
But most of the gaming memories I have with him are like racing related, and, related to Rad Racer and Top Gear and stuff like that. So when I think Rad Racer, I just think my brother Ben immediately.
That's cool.
So,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing that you just reminded me of is that this game made me really good at other arcade racing games. Like I would always have trouble, like I'd go to like Chuck E. Cheese or something and really suck at like Road Blaster or Outrun or something. Mm-hmm. But then after getting this game and practicing on Rad Racer, I was able to go to the arcades and be like, oh yeah, I know this concept really well, and get much, much farther than I was able to do without it. So it was a good primer for like arcade racers too, just racing games in general.
That's the one I was trying to recall, was Outrun, because Outrun looks like just a more advanced version of Rad Racer, or very similar.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Rad Racer, it was kind of the other way around. I'm pretty sure Rad Racer was a copy of Outrun, because I think Outrun came first, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah, I just mean like in terms of like it being a better game.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right, so you've got a track from Rad Racer 2 you'd like to share, so let's move on to that one.
Yeah. All right. This is Coast to Coast from Rad Racer 2, composed by that guy, Nobuo Uematsu, which I never can say quite right, and Hiroshi Nakamura. All right, that was Coast to Coast from Rad Racer 2, composed by Ed, take over here,
Nobuo Uematsu,
and Hiroshi Nakamura. Yeah, I was just saying before we broke that I get a little self-conscious when it comes to even pronouncing the most common Japanese composer names. Sometimes I just get a little tripped up.
It's not easy. It's not easy at all.
But let the pros take over.
Sometimes I just David Wise it. I just brute force my way through it.
Yep. But yeah, this track, and I was thinking about it as it was playing, and I was like, I think this may have been one of those games where I started to really realize how much video game music meant to me, or how much I liked it, or something. because I just, I mentioned earlier that I picked the NES back up when I was like in middle school or high school or whatever, when occasionally pick up new to me games. And I feel like I remember, hearing this a lot as a kid, obviously, and playing it, being like 5-6 years old or whatever, and it making an impression on me, but not really thinking much about it. And then later as a teenager being like, you can choose, I'm assuming Rad Racer, the first one is like this too, but you can choose the track as you're racing, right?
Not in the original one, no.
Okay, so in Rad Racer 2, you've got 2 different tracks, and you can choose between the 2, kind of like radio stations or whatever.
Okay.
And so I just remember being like always switching between the 2 and being like, I like this one better. No, I like this one better.
I'm sorry. You're talking musical tracks, and I'm thinking like race tracks. Yes, you can choose.
Okay.
There's 3 different songs you can choose from on the original Rad Racer. Yes. Sorry.
I see. Yeah, that would be confusing saying tracks. But I just remember like listening to these over and over while playing and just, again, like kind of switching back and forth on which one was my favorite, because the one we just heard, Coast to Coast, is, like you mentioned when we were listening to it, has way more of an outrun. What is that one called? Sound Shower?
Magical Sound Shower, yeah.
Yeah, it has that kind of feel, like sort of a little bit islandy.
Very breezy.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one was way more rockin', which, by the way, Cameron Werma and I have done maybe, at this point, maybe 4 covers of NES tunes, and we covered that one. It's called Gumball Crash. And it's, again, way more of a straightforward rock song, and it's also really, really good. But this one, there's just something way more nostalgic about the feel of it. And again, it may just because I'm associating it with my own experience, or just that it has that breezy feel, and it just makes me feel good all over.
Yeah.
But I don't know. And again, going back to what I was saying about Captain America, that music, it just has everything I like about simple VGM tunes, like, done on the NES or whatever, with just these limited amount of voices and a lot of call and response. Like, you have the dee-lee-lee-lee-dee-doo, and then the other voice comes in with dee-dee-doo, like little echo things going on and little bits of counter melody, but then sometimes them joining together for a harmony. Like, I just love that stuff so much, and I think it's just so effective and such a cool way to use, a limited amount of stuff. But again, it's just really solidly composed, which is not surprising considering, who did it. But I have a lot of good things to say about it, obviously. Yeah,
I think listening to these 2 tracks back to back is really interesting too, because you kind of get to see how Uematsu matured a little bit. The sounds are a little more rounded, like the Rad Racer tunes are very harsh, and every note is like full throttle. There's not much filtering going on, or, false filtering or whatever you want to call it going on. With Rad Racer 2, it sounds so much more melodic and a little bit softer, and everything just kind of flows together a little bit more evenly. And whether that was just the sound he was going for or not, I feel like there's a little more maturity, a little more experience behind this soundtrack. You can kind of see where he's like learned from what he did on his previous soundtracks, and even the sound driver he was using might be a little bit better too, but you start to feel a little bit more like these songs are a little bit closer to what he's famous for on the Final Fantasy games, as opposed to the almost unrecognizable Rad Racer 1 soundtrack.
Right.
So as far as gameplay goes, like I said, I only rented this one. I'm not really that familiar with it. Is there like significant differences in the gameplay between the 2 games?
No, not that I remember. And of course, I haven't played either of these games in a really long time, but I was definitely more familiar with Rad Racer 2. I did feel like it definitely, along with the music, graphically, it just had a softer, more refined feel to it. And I would say that just goes all around, like sound design and how it looked and how it controlled and everything. But again, this is talking like not really doing a proper comparison of the 2. But I just felt like it looked better and played better and sounded a little bit better and all that kind of stuff. But essentially the same game.
Cool. I'll have to go back to it. I don't know why, for some reason, I tend to avoid Rad Racer 2. I don't know whether I think I'm going to, like, ruin the memory of Rad Racer 1 or something. Just because that was, like, like I said, probably my 3rd or 4th NES games. One of, like, my prototypical video games from my youth.
Like, Rad Racer will think you're cheating on it, maybe?
Maybe I'm married to Rad Racer.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to judge you either way.
Yeah. Maybe if Rad Racer knows that I'm playing Rad Racer 2, it'll be okay with it. We can open the relationship up.
I was about to say, just keep the communication open and you should be okay.
As long as everybody loves each other, we're all fine.
Yep.
This is getting weird. Okay.
What are they trying to say?
Yeah, weird is a good segue into our next title. Are you ready for some new music?
I am.
All right, so weird is good because the next one is from the game Funhouse, based on the game show. This is Stage 2, released in 1991, composed by George Sanger and David Warhol. All right, that was Stage 2 from Funhouse. That came out on the NES in 1991, composed by George Sanger and David Warhol. Now, okay, Cameron, confession time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have that much nostalgia for this particular game.
Okay.
But as we were talking while the song was playing, you almost hit the nail on the head about why I'm sharing this song. Because George Sanger also wrote the soundtrack to Maniac Mansion.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've told this story on Pixel Tunes, but I don't know if I've ever shared it on VG Embassy. But when I was a kid, I loved the music from Maniac Mansion so much that I just wanted to like share it with the world. It was bizarre, my love for that soundtrack. And so I didn't have very many friends in school because I was the kind of kid that loved the Maniac Mansion soundtrack. And so one friend of mine who lived in the neighborhood, we would kind of lend each other video games back and forth. And I was like, oh my God, dude, you have to borrow Maniac Mansion from me. It's so good. The music is so good. I was just like talking it up. So I give him the game. He takes it home for, I don't know, a week or whatever. And he gives it back to me. And I'm like, so what'd you think of the game? And he was like, it was all right. And I was like, okay, well, what did you think of the music? And he was like, oh, I didn't really like it at all. And I felt like I've never felt so dejected. It was like something that I just like wanted to love and share with him. And he was like, it's not very good.
Right.
Like, no.
Yeah.
So then later on when I rented Funhouse is a crap game. Just don't play it. It's not good. I didn't remember anything positive about this game at all, except for turning it on and hearing this music and going, oh my God, this is Maniac Mansion music. Like, I didn't know how else to describe it. I didn't know that there was the same composer or the same company or whatever. I was just like, whoever made the Maniac Mansion music also made this music, and this music might even be better. I think it was also, unfortunately, one of those kind of games where you couldn't, because it was like a game show game. Everything had a countdown timer, so like you couldn't just sit there and let the music play. I couldn't record it to a cassette tape, so I just kind of had to, unfortunately, bring the game back without having the benefit of recording the soundtrack to tape like I would do with some other games with sound tests. So I missed it very much. And then finally, like with the dawn of the internet and Nintendo sound files coming out, I was able to get the album back and listen to it in full. And just this song, every time I listen to this song, I just like get goosebumps. I don't know what it is about it. The programming is sloppy as hell. Like notes just sound disjointed, and the drum attack is a little too slow, and it feels like it's a little bit off tempo. But I don't know, for some reason I just love that. It just feels like NES garage band music. I don't know. What'd you think about it?
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying, in that it sounds like the quote-unquote imperfection of it makes it sound a little more human.
Yeah, for sure.
And man, this one blew me away. This is right up my alley. And like you said, I immediately was like, this sounds like Maniac Mansion. I want to say I've maybe heard the soundtrack at some point before, but didn't really make a note of it. But man, it's good, and I would say it's my top pick out of all the ones we've played so far. Like even my own, like just in terms of like just immediately loving it. But
let me just stop you right there, and I'll just say that 6th grade Eddie Wilson would love you right now.
Okay, he would be glad that I appreciated his advanced VGM palette and his appreciation for George Sanger. And every time I hear Sanger, I think like it's like you can't say it in a way that doesn't sound weird. Sanger. But man, it's just good. And Maniac Mansion, along with that, is just so good. Like it's just like you say, it's a little raw, it's a little dirty, but in the best kind of way. And the soloing is ridiculous. I was saying like it was bordering on Bill and Ted levels of NES guitar
just
shredding.
Gratuitous. Yeah.
Right, and if you've never heard that, you should. It is hilarious and awesome. But this was done in such a way that I wasn't like laughing. I was like if I was laughing, it was like, in a this is awesome kind of way, not in a this is a little too much.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
But yeah, this rocks so hard. I love it.
Speaking of George Sanger, this actually goes back to the last show we did together, the Edutainment show. So being kind of like a fan of George Sanger based on Maniac Mansion and Funhouse and all that stuff, when Logan got old enough, I started breaking out all of the Humongous Games titles like Putt Putt and Pajama Sam and all that.
Yeah.
And little did I know that George Sanger actually wrote a lot of the music for those games. So when we did the Edutainment episode, I actually tried to find some music from those games, because a lot of them, they were like vocal songs that had a lot of different parts and harmonies, and they were really good, but because they were like really ancient CD based titles, the compression on it was horrible, and it was just almost not worth playing on a podcast because all you would hear is static. after the MP3 compression did its number on it. So actually, I found George Sanger's contact information. I reached out to him. I was like, do you have like reference quality or CD quality music from these games that I could, grab from you so I could play it on the show and kind of explain what the show is all about, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, I do, but I'm in the process of putting together this Kickstarter to put out an album of all of the like Putt Putt and all the Humongous Games music that I did in CD quality, and I can't like legally release anything until the Kickstarter's done. He was like, once the Kickstarter goes into full swing, I'll let you know, and we kind of left it at that. The Kickstarter hasn't materialized yet, and it's been, I think, almost a year since we did that edutainment episode, so I'm still kind of like hoping that I'd be able to get him on, because I would love to talk to him about Maniac Mansion and Funhouse and like
that'd be amazing. Just
the process of composing this music. And so from what I understand, George Sanger did a lot of the composition, but then David Warhol and Team Fat, which is what he called his associates, would actually do the coding note by note, the music that would go into the NES, because you can't really just do it MIDI style. You have to actually like program these songs into the machine itself.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't want to get any listeners' hopes up, but I do hope eventually he and I will be able to sit down and chat about some of these compositions, because that would really make especially sixth grade Ed's day being able to chat with George Sanger.
Yeah, and you got to look out for sixth grade self.
Sure.
And I mean that in all seriousness. Like, it is important to do things that would please your 10-year-old self, or your 10 to 12-year-old self, or whatever. But yeah, to your point about composition versus programming, I do want to recommend something outside of this podcast, because the Marcato brothers recently released an interview with is it Takeshi Terishi, the Mega Man 2?
Oh, Takeshi Tataishi, yeah.
Yeah, and he basically had the same setup. He would do all his stuff in sheet music, but then he had other people he would send it all to program. And I know some people, like the Fallens did both, right? So I know everybody had their own setup, but...
Yeah, some composers had custom software built for them so that they could actually write music a little more directly. But a lot of the Japanese composers, some of the American composers like George Sanger, they really didn't have that access to software like that. So yeah, you would have a composer write the music, and then I think more often than not they would have somebody that was more well versed in programming actually convert the music into machine code or assembly code in the NES's case to put it into the actual video game itself. So, yeah, there were a few more people involved than just the composer in a lot of cases.
Yeah, so if anything did ever materialize with George, it would be awesome to hear, like, if this in particular, Funhouse or Maniac Mansion, if that came out the way he was envisioning it, or if like the maybe some of the quote, and we don't mean this in a bad way, but like sloppiness, if that was like something that was to his taste, or maybe something he didn't like, it'd be interesting to find that out.
Yeah, for sure. I know he wrote the music for, I think, Adventures of Rad Gravity, if I'm not mistaken, and it's his composition. It's very recognizable as being in this style, but the title theme to that game just sounds awful. Like something happened during the conversion process that made that song like almost unlistenable, and it's always been passed around as like an example of terrible video game music, and I'm like, but don't judge a book by its cover, because George is capable of so much more than that. So I do wonder if there was some sort of an error, just somebody transposed a key or something and made that song just not what it should have been.
Gotcha. And yeah, the other thing was Humongous Games. We may have talked about this, but did that kind of spring out of the whole LucasArts games? Because obviously Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle, I want to say those were Tim Schafer.
Yeah. A lot of those guys did come from LucasArts. You're absolutely right.
Right. So is a separate company though, Humongous, or is it still affiliated?
It is. Yeah, they left LucasArts and then moved on to Humongous to work on that stuff.
Gotcha. And it was more geared towards younger kids.
Yep, exactly. But unlike a lot of other kids' games, the quality of it was, that of like a professional level adult game. So yeah.
Right, yeah. I've mentioned on that show that my wife was very familiar. She grew up with Pajama Sam and showed me some of it, and I was really impressed with the artwork. I was like, this straight up looks like like the third Monkey Island game where they were doing like the hand-drawn illustrations, and there's like foreground elements, and it's really something else.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm looking forward to when my little girl's, a few years older. Maybe we can, both of us really, me and my wife are looking forward to being like, okay, like point and click away, and
enjoy it.
Yeah. So that's cool.
6 years old, I think Logan was 6 when we started playing it, and he knew exactly what to do. We were able to solve the puzzles together, so that's a great age for it.
Yeah.
A couple more years. So, I just shared my game show game. I think you have a game show game ready to go?
I do. This is from Anticipation. This is the title theme, and it was composed by Jaboy David Wise.
I am full of anticipation.
Love it. All right, that was the title theme from Anticipation, composed by David Wise.
I anticipated it, and it was worth the anticipation.
Yeah. And hey, do yourself a favor if you're not familiar with this game. Look up the cover of the cartridge itself. It is 80s-tastic.
For sure.
You've got like a group of people, and they're just so pumped to be playing Anticipation. Like, it's like from the perspective of the TV. They're looking at the camera like just so excited. It's hard to understand why. I'm gonna admit, this game, I mean, maybe you can help me describe it a little bit. It's sort of it's like Pictionary, but like reverse Pictionary, because the computer, like you start each round, like any stage or however you want to say it, like round, and it's got dots up there, and the computer starts connecting the dots, and at any point, a player can buzz in and then spell out what they think the drawing is. So you've got categories, the way you would with Wheel of Fortune or whatever, and a lot of it, I gotta say, I remember being pretty hard, like not only as a kid, but trying it again as an adult and being like, I don't know what this is supposed to be, because it's just little connected dots, drawings or whatever. And I remember one of them being a sausage. And if you could imagine a drawing of a sausage, like it's just hard to, figure out what that is.
I think it did a pretty good job at describing it, yeah. The graphics are extremely low resolution, so if you're trying to get like a rounded edge, it's gonna look like an octagon, basically. Like, I can imagine getting a sausage and it would look like, I don't know, some sort of polygon.
Let your imagination go wild.
Yes.
But the music, I will say, is probably the standout. I would say, you mentioned the low resolution graphics, and that applies to the gameplay itself when you're trying to figure out what these dots are supposed to be when they're connected. The graphics in general, though, I feel like are pretty good, but I feel like the music is probably the standout of this particular game, just in terms of how good it is. It's all got kind of, like, it's all different, but it all has this kind of like kind of feel, like it's all swinging, which of course is hard to pull off with electronic music, especially of this era, and yet David Wise did it. Some of it sounds like early rock and roll, some of it sounds kind of like doo-wop, some of it's kind of like jazzy, but all of it's pulled off really well. It's all arranged really well, and as you heard from the music, like, it's all super clean and crisp.
Yeah.
And it's all just catchy, and it sticks in your head, so I just really like the soundtrack in general.
So, like, if you're familiar with, like, David Wise's Snake, Rattle, and Roll soundtrack, you have a good idea of what Anticipation sounds like. It's a lot of really classic American rock influenced stuff. The other thing I find really funny is that Anticipation and Pictionary are both mediocre games on the NES that involve drawing and guessing pictures and stuff. And one has an amazing soundtrack from Dave Wise, the other has an amazing soundtrack from Tim Fallon, and those are the only reasons really it's worth playing the game. It's like they were kind of developed independently of each other, but ended up being the same kind of game with the same kind of soundtrack. It's really weird.
Yeah, they're similar in that regard and different in that David Wise's music, I feel like, fits, and I don't mean this disparagingly because Pictionary is amazing, but it fits better within the game. Like, it's not...
Oh, sure.
It's hard to imagine playing... I've never played Pictionary on the NES, but it is hard to imagine playing that game with like all that going on. And
it's like throwing Led Zeppelin on while you're trying to like draw pictures. It's a disconnect between the two.
Again, but definitely similar in the regard that you were mentioning, like amazing soundtracks for drawing games.
So did you play this with your brother a lot, or was it just...
This is one, I feel like it may have been a full family experience just because we wanted to recreate the picture on the cover. And I feel like it had a pseudo 4-player thing where like one player was the D-pad on player 1, the second player was the A and B button on that same controller.
That sounds familiar.
And so you could buzz in, then you would take the controller and like spell out whatever you're trying to spell out. I don't remember ever playing it like that, but I have to assume that at some point we did. Again, with most of these, I remember mostly just playing them by myself, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I remember playing with like my brother and maybe my parents once or twice.
Very cool. All right, so ready for my last pick of the show?
Yep.
So my final pick is Room Theme 1 from Solomon's Key. And this was composed by Michiharu Hasuya. We'll be right back. Oh, that is a total earworm. That was Room Theme 1 from Solomon's Key, released in 1987 and composed by Michiharu Hasuya. I'm picking all really, really early NES games for my collection because these were just the ones that, even if they weren't that great, would just get so much play because my options were so limited.
Yeah.
I don't know how I ended up getting Solomon's Key. It just kind of appeared in my collection one day, at least as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's a puzzler. It requires a lot of brain power. I think this might have been the first video game that I ever really had to like think about. That wasn't just a straight up kind of an action game. And I really enjoyed it because of that. I liked that it kind of put my brain to work. And this music plays probably about 80% of the stages that you play. And there's like, I don't know, 256 different rooms you go through in this game before you get to the end. So I listened to this song a lot. And it's so catchy. And regardless of how much I listened to it, I really never got tired of it. It's got like Hebrew, like Middle Eastern influences, kind of based on the mythology behind the whole, you know, King Solomon and all that. It's kind of built into the story behind this game. And they really kind of dove into that region's music for this soundtrack, which is really cool. And so I never really heard music like that up until this point, so this music sounded very exotic and very cool to me. You know, when we were listening to it, Cam, you even wanted to play a couple more loops just to get the full feel for it. So what were your opinions on this?
Yeah, I was commenting that it's a lot to take in. And that's kind of the same thing. Like, I thought Solomon's Key, okay. And then the the video I was watching for reference, it had a the screenshot, and it looked like, I don't know if it was a Star of David, but it had a symbol that was kind of similar to that. So in my head already, I'm thinking, like Jewish or Middle Eastern kind of music. And it does have that feel, but not in any kind of obvious, like super obvious way. Like, it definitely feels sort of exotic, at least to, my ears. But not in any kind of way that if I didn't know it was called Solomon's Key, or I didn't, know anything about it, I wouldn't necessarily put it on, that necessarily, like Jewish or Middle Eastern traditions or anything like that. So I feel like it's like pulling on other influences in the best kind of way, where it doesn't just feel like they're ripping off little, I was talking about Dragon Power earlier, it having little things like ding, 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 ding. Like, it didn't, right. It's like the opposite of that.
Yeah, it's not like stereotypical. It's just honest influence.
Exactly. And I just really appreciated it. It had some really cool melodic runs, like a lot of busy stuff going on. I mean, the drums was just, it did sound like kind of early NES, where it's just a constant like kind of thing, but man, it just really worked, and it did sound like thinking music. It sounded like smart people thinking music. That's what we call it down here. But I liked it a lot.
Yeah, there's not too much of a story that I know of. I know you play as a sorcerer known only as Dana, and you have to retrieve Solomon's Key to restore the world to light from demons that were accidentally released. And I think Cam Worma and I briefly talked about Solomon's Key in our Switch Indie episode just 2 episodes ago, because he played a track from All Was Awakening, and part of the mechanic for that game was building blocks and stepping on them and using this kind of like block creation mechanic, almost Minecraft style, to get through these side-scrolling NES levels, or NES style levels. And a lot of that was based on Solomon's Key. In Solomon's Key, your level is one screen only. Like, the screen doesn't scroll, you've just got one screen to hang out in. And you start on a certain area of the screen, and there is a door on the opposite side of the screen, and there's a key somewhere, and there are solid blocks scattered around the screen, and enemies either on those blocks or dropping out of like source points, and your task is to create and destroy blocks of your own and jump up on them or break them in order to get to the key and then unlock the door and get to the door. And it sounds much easier than it actually is. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, a lot of different enemies that you can't destroy, or that you just have to block in by building blocks or drop on top of other enemies to kill them. So there's a lot of strategy involved. You control Dana like, an action game, but it really is more of a puzzler than anything else. It's more like Bubble Bobble than like an action platformer kind of a deal. So you really need to like get in the right place at the right time and figure out what you need to do to solve each level. So A lot of fun. Like I said, there's like 200 something levels, and it gets really, really hard towards the end. I don't think I've ever beaten this game, but it's worth playing. Good soundtrack. And I think Fire and Ice is technically the sequel to this game, which is like one of the most rare and valuable NES games out there. So probably play a ROM for that one. But I think you can probably get Solomon's Key pretty cheap if you're a game collector. And it's worth every penny.
Gotcha.
So that pretty much brings us to the end of the show. I know we do have an outro track. You want to talk about that now before we wrap everything up?
Yeah, it's from another game that I grew up with called Legendary Wings. I don't have a lot to say about the game. It's pretty typical kind of vertical shooter stuff, but the music is pretty dang good, and the level 1 theme is especially good. And those are Manami Matsumai and Tamayo Kawamoto and Yoshiro Sakaguchi, and it's just a good one, and I wanted to see if we could squeeze it in there, so I appreciate you doing that.
Absolutely. And like a lot of those, they are, heavy hitting Capcom composers, so you're going to hear lots of like Mega Man influence there. And I think we featured Legendary Wings a little bit on Pixel Tunes as well, but I don't have much familiarity with the game. But it's a great outro tune, so you'll have some cool jams to listen to on your way out. But that being said, Cameron, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.
Yeah, I'm always happy to come on. This is always a great time.
Yeah, especially talking about like childhood like this. I love getting to know my VG ambassadors better. Like, I didn't even know you had a brother until now, and now I feel like I know your brother. So it's kind of cool to chill out and kind of explore our childhoods and how they, were different and similar, and the games that we loved as kids.
Sure. And same. Like, I feel, you do get to know someone a little bit better when you share your stories. And if you want to do a SNEStalgia at any point, let me know, because those memories will be a little bit clearer for me, and might make a nice companion piece to this.
I would totally agree, and I would definitely be down for that. So we can start planning on that pretty soon.
Sweet.
So as far as the Mad Gear goes, an inclusion to the album that you just put out, are you guys up to anything else lately? Yeah,
well, first of all, if you're interested in checking out the album, themadgear.bandcamp.com is the best place to do it. You can listen for free and then buy it if you like. And youtube.com/themadgear is a good place. That's where we're always updating our stuff there and trying to put up, new stuff like every month or so. We've got a show coming up here in Nashville at the High Watt with another VGM tribute group called Night of the Round. And they do all Final Fantasy stuff, and it's like hard-hitting metal. Boy, I'm telling you, it's hard-hitting.
Cool.
But yeah, they are really solid. We're playing with a couple of other local bands as well. So that's going to be a good one. Ed, you know a little bit more. You know something about a project we've had in the works for a while. It's a semi-animated project. We're still working on it, tweaking it, redoing a little bit of the art and stuff. And, for the listeners, Ed's been always nice enough to give me opinions on works in progress, and that's exactly what he did with this, and has helped me kind of fine-tune some stuff. So we're hoping for the fall to have that out, and maybe raising some funds to try to make some more. We'll kind of play that by ear once we've actually got it out and everything, and see what the interest is on it. But yeah, we're super excited about that.
Yeah, I'll definitely put links up to that when you guys finally release it. But suffice to say, it felt like watching a Saturday morning cartoon again, with some real badass heroes and a really funny story. So definitely look forward to it when it comes out. I know we're being kind of vague as to what it kind of like actually is, but suffice to say, it's very cool. It'll let you in on a little bit more of the mystique behind the Mad Gear members. So, speaking of which, I did say that I would tell you my favorite track from the album at the end of the show. 100%, it is the Ragnarok theme from Battletoads and Battlemaniacs.
Awesome. I am very partial to that as well.
Oh, God, the arrangement is great. I mean, Dave Wise did a great job in kind of, with his samples and making a guitar sound like a guitar and a horn sound like a horn, but you guys, took the arrangement and enlivened it I guess that's a word now, with fantastic chuggy guitars and some great horn work, and it feels like you took the SNES song and just kind of brought it to life. So you did a really good job with that.
I appreciate that, and that's partially due to way back when doing the Tough Tunes on Pixel Tunes Radio, and I brought that one on, and I don't know if one of y'all suggested it or if it just put it in my brain that this is a really solid track and maybe we should consider it doing it as a band, but it's definitely partially due to that episode.
Awesome. Glad to hear that I had a little bit of influence there. That's very cool.
Yeah.
So, with that said, you should definitely look forward to a SNEStalgia episode with both of us in the future.
Sweet.
I'm going to keep putting questions out on Discord, so like I said at the beginning of the show, if you head over to thevgembassy.com, right underneath the banner, you'll see a link to the Discord page. You can join that, and you will see some audience participation stuff that I'll put out if you want to get your opinion heard on shows in the future, or on the side panel of the webpage, you'll see Discord widget. It just kind of shows the active members that are on there at the time. If you click on that, it'll bring you to the Discord page as well. Otherwise, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/the VG Embassy, or on Twitter at the VG Embassy. If you want to download the podcast, you can find it all over the place. We're on Spotify, we're on Google Play, we're on iTunes, you name it. You got a generic RSS feed and you want to just plug our stuff into your generic podcast listener device on your funicular thing, you can do that too. Just head over to thevgembassy.com and click on the RSS icon.
But not the SS feed. We're not even messing with that.
No, just the RSS feed. Anyways, as always, I'd like to thank Indira for the art and Trevin Hughes, aka Dread, for the podcast theme song. And, as always, our Patreon patrons at the tourist level, some dude named Cam Chiles and Michael Bridgewater from the Forever Sound Version podcast. Our VG emissaries, Chris Murray, Chris Myers, Donovan Orofino, Ben the Dyad Dishman, Dave Parrish, Chris Steenerson, Jordan Worma from the Table to Stage podcast, and Volt Supreme, our audio attaché members, Cameron Worma, Carlos from the Heroes 3 podcast, and Scott McElhone. And as usual, our VG ambassador, the patron saint of VGM podcasts, Alex, the messenger.
Bless him.
Messenger. Next up, I believe, as long as everything goes correctly, we will have a new VG ambassador on our next episode. Dan Lawton, who's been part of the VGM community on Facebook for quite a long time, will finally be joining me as a VG ambassador. We'll be talking about games that are extra hard and super challenging, but we still love listening to the music from. Cam, thanks again for hanging out with me. I hope to have you back really soon.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you were saying get excited for a SNEStalgia. There's no way they'd be more excited than me.
I've already got a bunch of games in the back of my head that I know I'm going to share, so...
Yeah.
That'll be sweet.
Same.
All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Peace out.
Bye.